I need to talk to you again about the Supreme Court. In 2022, when the Supreme Court's majority overturned Roe and Casey, therefore no longer providing protection to women so that they could make use of abortions at their discretion, my reaction was shock and anger and dismay. I felt very bad for women and for families, especially poor families where having another mouth to feed can sometimes really have a negative impact in terms of putting the family in a position of greater financial distress. It can tear, and I'm not blaming the baby. Don't misunderstand me. I am just saying that you get to a certain point where your finances are so broken that you're living from paycheck to paycheck, if you're lucky, and people and lives are destroyed by living in that kind of a position, much less if you are truly broke. You're truly living in a state of abject poverty. And I'm not saying that I feel that women should just use abortion as a, oops, I didn't use protection and I didn't take the morning after pill, so I'm going to do this. I don't believe that personally. I do believe, things like rape, incest, and the possible loss of the mother's life, because if you lose a baby, yes, it's devastating, but if you lose the mama, that's even more devastating, because nobody relies on the baby. Everybody, especially many men who are like big children, rely on the mama. To lose the mother is like not knocking the legs out from underneath somebody, but literally obliterating their legs with a bomb. So, but as the justices of the Supreme Court should always do, I made a decision to research what had happened and to be neutral. I set aside my own personal feelings on the topic, which I had discussed with my sister, who is more conservative than I am. I'm a centrist. And we basically agreed, for the most part, we agreed in what we thought was okay for abortion, even though she's evangelical. So I read the majority decision, and I read some of what Thomas wrote and some of what Roberts wrote and most of the dissenting decision. And what became clear to me, especially in the case of Thomas, was that they were not functioning as justices. I can't say none of them were, but most of them, on the majority side and on the minority side or dissenting side, most of them were not behaving like justices. They were behaving like partisans. They were behaving like conservatives and liberals. They were behaving like people who were making decisions based on their personal feelings instead of based on the Constitution, which is not what they're supposed to do. They are supposed to set aside their personal preferences and make decisions based on the law, based on common law, based on the Constitution, based on a large amount of reliance by the public, based on precedents, based on history, which is, precedents folds into history and all that. And as I read through, I saw that they attempted to support the decision to overturn Roe and Casey, And some of the things they presented did support it. However, some of the things that they used as justifications did not actually support their decision. Some of them were largely irrelevant. And although they talked about the public being largely reliant on it and that you're supposed to look at that as a justice, they did not use that as a deciding factor. And they relied very, very heavily on what could be described as a limited history of anti-abortion in prior history, especially very far back in the history of the nation. And there were other things. I have my notes. I never bothered. I never made the video. I mean, I started making the video, but anxiety got in my way. I mean, when I have to do heavy editing of a video, it just stresses me out a lot. And I shelved it. I shouldn't have, but I did. And when I read Chief Justice Roberts' opinion, it was crystal clear to me that although he was writing in a way that he wanted people to believe that he was neutral on the topic, he was clearly not neutral. He's an intelligent man, don't get me wrong. But it was obvious to me. Now maybe because I used to be an English teacher, I don't know. But it was obvious to me that he was feigning neutrality to make the public believe that the decision that had been made was the right one based on the Constitution and all the factors that they take into consideration. But I knew he was lying. I knew that he had deep-seated feelings or he was influenced to go in that direction, or both. And Clarence Thomas, he made no bones about it. In his decision, he made it so obviously clear that not only did he not approve of abortion, but he doesn't approve of gay marriage. He doesn't approve of all the things that the fundamentalist evangelical Christians who want a Christian nation believe are wrong. And some of the others. I didn't read everybody's, but of the ones that I read, there was a definite trend amongst the conservatives to allow themselves to be swayed by their personal opinions or by the opinions of others rather than looking at the facts, doing their job correctly. And although I went back and forth as to whether they were right or wrong, ultimately, the fact that they brushed aside certain precedents and they totally ignored the large amount of reliance that American women have on the availability of abortion across the country, as if, although that's a major consideration for every case, or should be for every case, as if it didn't matter. It was clear that they stacked the deck. And it was very hard for me to come to that conclusion. I had to look at a lot. I looked at sources they referenced. I looked at other sources. I read the dissenting opinion, and I thought in some ways the dissenting opinion was very childish. I understood why they felt the way they did. I could tell they felt very, very strongly. But the way they presented it was not a mature, reasoned opinion. It was very passionate. And again, as with the conservatives who were the majority, some of them on the liberal side also were not doing their jobs right. But I didn't want to just come out and say Roberts is not doing his job right, because that's a very significant allegation. I knew it was right, but I didn't know if it extended into other areas. And yet he voted for other things that are extremely questionable, like Citizens United and Trump's immunity and other cases in which he again tried to pose as being the neutral head judge or justice, but now more documents have been leaked which indicate that Chief Justice Roberts controlled the decision to provide Trump with a large degree of immunity, that it was a predetermined decision, that Alito, Gorsuch, and Thomas all were on board with that, although some of them, like Gorsuch and Thomas, I believe, wanted to wait till October to release the decision. And some others, like Sotomayor, wanted to get it out immediately. And privately, apparently, if I understood correctly, Chief Justice Roberts, who I feel should be stripped of his position on the Supreme Court, as should Alito, Gorsuch, and Thomas, for corruption, for failure to uphold the ethics of the Supreme Court, for failure to do their jobs correctly, and so on. He was trying to influence judges on lower courts to side with them to help Trump. Now, this is not about whether I like or don't like Trump. This is about a perversion of justice by justices on the Supreme Court. Over and over and over again. And what makes matters worse is, although the Democrats have repeatedly called for investigations, the Republicans, almost to a person, have stood firm and refused. They have blockaded every effort to take Thomas off the bench and Alito off the bench. They have done what they have done for most of my life, which is to say, they have aided and abetted criminals. For example, during the 1990s, when it started to become a big thing with big tobacco lying to the public, it was brought before a congressional committee, and all the CEOs lied through their teeth about the addictiveness and dangers of cigarette smoking. And they were going to be prosecuted, but the Republicans would not allow it. These were men who were responsible for many millions of people dying of cancer, emphysema, and so on from cigarette smoking. These were people who had deliberately led their companies to make products that were addictive and targeted the most vulnerable members of society: children, young teens, and young adults. Because within that time frame, that's when you're most likely to become an addict to something. And they protected them. And there have been several situations since that time when the Republicans have protected criminals, which means the Republican Party is full of criminals. I'm not saying Democrats are innocent. I am not a Democrat. I'm a centrist. But in this situation where the Democrats have repeatedly, numerous times, asked for an investigation of the Supreme Court members who are clearly in violation of their ethics code, especially Thomas and Alito, and now clearly Roberts and Gorsuch, the Republicans have prevented this. And when January 6th happened, And the Democrats went to the Republicans to have a bipartisan committee to investigate the January 6th insurrection, which, by the way, there is no legal precedent for that. What was done by those people was not patriotic. It was not legal. There are ways to change the government, but that is not one of them. So when the Democrats went to the Republicans, with the exception of 2, refused. The only Republicans who had the loyalty, patriotism, and guts to join the investigation were Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. The rest of the Republicans were either cowards or traitors, which is to say traitors, and did what they could to aid and abet the insurrectionists before, during, and after, in my opinion. So again, we have 2 of 3 branches of the government which have been taken control of by radical conservatives. And the Republican Party, which used to be very different when I was a baby compared to now, because it used to be that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party were not so much about a unified economic vision, a unified social vision. It was very different. There were conservatives in the Democratic Party. There were liberals in the Republican Party, and so on. And a lot of the Southern racists, who were called the Dixiecrats at one point, because they broke off from the Republicans, and that allowed Nixon to win instead of Wallace or Humphrey. A lot of the Southern racists moved to the Republican Party. A lot of the conservatives shifted to the Republican Party. A lot of the liberals shifted to the Democratic Party. This started during the civil rights movement of the 60s and 70s. Because of what happened with Nixon, because of Carter's decisions. But Nixon was a major embarrassment for the Republicans. The party was, it was just dying. And they had a secret campaign, I guess you could say, to recruit those Southern racists into the party, to revive the party. Because what's better for bringing energy into a party than anger and hate? I mean, look at the candidates that the Republicans have been putting forward lately. They're full of terrible dissension and racism, and in history, divide and conquer has long been a tactic that is used, and in America it is often used against us by the politicians, by the rich. Not all rich, not all politicians, and other people too. People who are trying to grab power and wealth and property. It is my very, very strong opinion at this time that the Supreme Court, especially Chief Justice Roberts, Gorsuch, Thomas, Alito, and the other conservatives and the liberals, should all be investigated. And Roberts, Alito, and Thomas should be removed without pay. And the others should be investigated and reminded of their responsibility to act as justices of the Supreme Court, not as partisan operatives and not as children. They should behave maturely and with full neutrality, no matter what their personal beliefs are. The American public has lost so much faith in the Supreme Court. And those men that I just named are a big reason for it. They have undermined the Supreme Court to the point that it's almost like we should just wipe the slate clean and start over again. Almost. Additionally, the Republicans need to be held to task. They need to be held responsible for refusing to prosecute corruption within the Supreme Court and corruption within their own ranks. Marjorie Taylor Greene should be removed from her position. She should be kicked out in shame. She's not the only one, but she's one of the ones that gets a lot of press and says a lot of BS. But the Republicans, by behaving like a unified party, irrespective of laws that are being broken, irrespective of treason, have demonstrated they are either cowards or traitors, and should be treated as such. Our government is at risk. If we get the wrong person in the White House next, America will cease to be what it has been my entire life, what it has been yours for your entire lives too. And I don't want to speculate on the possible outcomes, but I can tell you that if the Republicans have all three branches of the government, it will be very bad for the future of this country. And it will be very bad for a majority of Americans. I never thought I'd see this day, and I hope it doesn't happen. But these things need to be fixed. It has become unacceptable to the degree that our nation might be dissolved. Thank you for watching. I hope you will think carefully about what I have said and understand the severity of the situation. I wish I could tell you to have a great day, but I don't really feel like I can say that right now. But I do still wish it for you. Thanks for watching.